Welcome, everybody, to the Beyond Red and Blue podcast. I am your host, Bo Richards, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Dan Humphrey.
Hey, hey, hey.
This is podcast number 11, and it is election week. Or should we say post-election? Let's say election week, and then once we know the results, it'll be post-election.
I like that.
I figured next week we probably still won't know, and then we can, or maybe if we do, we can call it post-election then.
Yeah, that works.
Got it. So the purposes of our podcast today is simply to kind of go over, rehash, discuss some of the things that we have heard and seen, both related to the election itself, and then there's probably some things we can go over that are maybe not even really related that have also occurred in the news recently. I had a few things, if we get to them, that I do find quite interesting. As of today, which is a Wednesday, there is, as of yet, no results. It's still undecided. What are your thoughts so far? What do you think? What are you thinking?
I will say so far it's been calmer than I expected, which is good. See, where are we sitting here? So I got the live feed up, and at the race to 270, meaning 270 electoral votes needed to win this here election. Right now, Joe Biden is at 248 and Trump is at 214.
And that's been like that for a few hours, I think.
Yeah. And if you listen to the pundits, it's a very close race in terms of how they're predicting certain, swing states or battleground states or whatever it is they're calling them. So yeah, it's still anybody's game. Apparently, Nevada is not going to be giving out any updated numbers until tomorrow at like 9 a.m. or something Pacific time. And it is quite likely that Nevada will be a deciding state. So if you look at all the rest of them that are yet to be official, but leaning in a particular direction, you got Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. Those are Trump states, most likely.
So Pennsylvania's leaning Trump, is that right?
Currently, yep.
I thought it was early yesterday. I didn't watch much of it yesterday, but I do remember at least at some point people were thinking that Biden might close out Pennsylvania, which would make it almost impossible for Trump to get reelected.
Yeah, and still could. So if it comes down to Trump getting Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, and then Biden getting Nevada and Michigan, that's where Nevada becomes the deciding state. It's only 6 electoral votes, but that would be enough to get him over the top. If, on the other hand, Biden takes Pennsylvania, that's effectively a done deal, if I understand the math correctly. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at with that. So Pennsylvania's a big one, Nevada's a big one. Pennsylvania's probably the bigger,
Sure,
depending on which way that goes. But if Trump gets it, that's not a lock for him. But if Biden gets it, apparently that's pretty much a lock.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that goes.
I would imagine, and I actually wouldn't even blame either Biden or Trump for this if they decided to do it, but that a couple of recounts will be requested.
Oh, yeah. I guess Trump's already requesting a recount in Wisconsin.
Sure. It's under 1%. And I mean, people are I haven't read anything about that with Wisconsin in particular. I haven't seen how close everything was, and I'm sure people are probably angry that he's doing it. But I mean, we have a 1% rule for a reason, and it's like, this is an election. That seems reasonable to me. Some of the other stuff that Trump has been saying seems unreasonable and divisive, but unless there's actual proof to back up some of his claims about stopping votes and stuff, but and then maybe it's warranted. But it's like, well, if you're under the 1% margin, that's well within for a recount. It's like you might as well do your diligence.
Yep.
That's 30. In a state, 40,000 votes swing isn't that big of an issue when you got 10 million people, right? Or whatever. I don't know how many Wisconsin has, but like votes get miscounted. They get they don't get counted at all. Like this stuff happens. And so you might as well exercise that right. And I would expect both to do so, honestly.
Sure. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, Trump already said that, his lawyers are all lined up and ready to go.
Yeah.
the strike of midnight last night. They're ready to go in and fight as hard as they can. So
Sure. And again, don't blame them for that.
Yeah.
Like some of the stuff I'm not entirely sure is warranted, but it's still, you're going to do what you got to do. And I think last night at like 2 a.m., Trump was still awake for some reason. I guess it'd be 5 a.m. It was 2 a.m. at the White House. So it was like 11 a.m. here, or
PM.
Yeah, PM here, sorry. And he was, not only did he claim that he had won already, but he said that, paraphrasing, but basically due to what he perceived as actual voter fraud and votes being counted after the fact that they shouldn't have been counted, he didn't think that voting should continue in certain states. But there's, near as I can tell, there's like not a shred of evidence to support this potential voter fraud.
No.
I can understand the thought behind it. It's like you really want to win an election, so you open up ballots that were postmarked late or got in late after the deadline, that sort of thing. And it's like, it's not a huge leap to think that might occur, but if there's no evidence of it, for the president to stand up and declare victory in the middle of the night and then claim that states shouldn't count votes because they're going to pad votes for Biden. It's like, and that's kind of the same old rhetoric that we hear from Trump, right? It follows that divisive line of there's this conspiracy and, this absolutist take of, everything is against me.
It's in line with his narrative. It has nothing to do with actual facts or anything like that. It's just, this is how he's running his campaign, which has been surprisingly successful. No matter what happens with this election, he got himself elected in 2016, may very well do it again. And just the fact that it's so close means he's got a ton of supporters and his strategy works for him, which is a commentary on politics in and of itself. But, no surprises at all with what Trump said and what he's doing.
Oh, not at all.
This is what we expected.
From what I've been able to tell, because I didn't really watch much of anything last night. I didn't read. I read a couple of articles and stuff, but not really about stuff he had said. It seems as if he's been quite tame compared to what I would have expected. Because I expected this kind of behavior, but I expected more of it. I expected to hear him call everywhere and make more and more outrageous claims about fraud and just whip everyone up into a frenzy as like a last ditch effort to just confuse the shit out of the public. And it seems as if he's been more quiet than that.
Much more toned down than normal.
Which I am surprised by.
He might just be tired.
So I listened to I actually had a hard time finding the whole White House clip where he like talked about how he won and stuff. And I was able to find cut-ups of it. And he sounded exhausted. Just his voice was like 2 octaves lower than normal. You get that when you're like super sleepy, and he just sounded drained. I mean, he went to like 14 different cities in like 72 hours.
Yeah,
and it's like I'm sure he's also old. I'm sure both him and Biden are just exhausted.
Yeah,
but yeah, it'll be interesting. I apparently the Democrats are internally are quite upset with themselves because the general election is not going how they initially thought it would. I think a lot of them actually expected to turn a couple of states that were red, and they expected more of a landslide. I'm sure some of the more risk averse members of the Biden's campaign were like, no, this could be tough, but I think they really expected like a shift in the public that didn't really manifest itself in the general election or hasn't really seemed to. And then on top of that, there wasn't a blue shift in the Senate or the House. Like I think the House in particular, which the Democrats control, I think they actually lost seats.
Did they officially lose seats? Yeah, I saw there was.
It's not over yet. So,
change.
There's. It's last I checked, I think they were down like 5 seats. So they still had a margin. They were still in the majority, but they had like lost 7 seats and then had usurped 2 Republican seats. So they still have a majority, but it's smaller, and so it's understandable why they'd be upset. And I don't know with the Senate what's going on there. I didn't actually look up if how the seats and things if there had been any changes or anything like that. But it was I thought it was very interesting that it seems throughout the. So first they're upset and they're calling for some people, I think anonymously, but so as not to get in trouble. But I think some people within the Democratic Party are calling for the firing of like the Democratic chairwoman. I forget her name, but the acronym is the DCCC, and I forgot to type her name up, but because she's kind of the one who organizes all of this and like lets people know what to expect. And
Organizes in terms of like the campaign?
Organizes like how they're going to. I believe it's basically like what states and seats they're going to focus on when it comes to allocating resources.
Okay.
Right, because I'm sure people who are listening are aware of this, but when it comes to most the general election, the presidents themselves and who stumps for them, the people who like endorse them, and then also when it comes to like the Democratic and the Republican National Convention and like the little subsidiary areas that they have within that company that like allocate resources and help with media and all that stuff, they don't help everyone equally. And the presidents and whoever's running for president, they don't go to every city, obviously, but they don't go to every major city. They don't even go to every state. I forget there was a couple of states that Trump even made a joke about he never goes to, and because they're always going to pick. Like I don't think Biden or Trump came to Washington.
Nope.
And it's like, why would you? Washington states voted Democrat since like I'm pretty sure they've always voted Democrat, even when Democrats were pro-slavery. I think they just voted Democrat. I think it's kind of always been a Democratic state, and I don't have the facts to back that up, but I know at least since the modern era,
Sure, yeah.
They've been Democrat for sure. So it's been 70 years at least. But so they pick and choose like where they go and who they allocate resources to and who they do, the DNC ads for and stuff like that. And so I think this woman's basically the head of that. She's like, okay, we need to focus on these. These are weak points in the Republican House. So we're going to try and push our guys and gals into taking their spots. And these people are safe, so we don't need to worry as much. And I think what happened is, they expected there to be this big public shift. They saw a bunch of weak points in the Republican House and probably the Senate, and they expected to turn a bunch of them to get Democrats into those seats. And then it seems like kind of the opposite happened. And so that kind of falls on whoever that leader is, which I find very interesting. That,
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if I find it interesting that they're apparent, like the pulse of the country and what I guess the Democratic elite felt was the pulse of the country are like two separate things. Big
time. Yeah. And that, Sam Harris had a brief little podcast or message on his podcast there, talking about how he finally it became clear to him the reason why people would be willing to vote for Trump. Like on the surface,
I hadn't listened to that yet, but I saw a clip of it come up.
Yeah, it's good. The gist of it is, we've heard this conversation before, but obviously Sam is very good at articulating it. But the gist of it being, because Trump is who he is, warts and all, and unapologetic about it, mm-hmm. and the Democratic Party is the exact opposite when they are the holier than thou elites telling you how bad you are and all the stuff that you're doing wrong. That does not resonate well with people.
No.
And a lot of people. I think that in combination with the new society that we're all growing into, meaning how much of our life is online now, and with cancel culture being what it is, people are less likely to freely express their opinions.
Yes.
So that combination of people who are not going to be honest in polls or even take polls or anything like that, and the inordinate amount of noise that the radical left is making, all the the woke-tivists and stuff like that, it seems like they are a bigger presence than they actually are.
Well, and the power that they wield too.
Right.
They have inordinate amounts of power.
But when it comes down to actual people in the physical world, their side is nowhere near as big as they thought.
Yes.
Right. If you can make a bunch of noise online and discover and develop this power of being able to cancel people and all that, and the actual real life effects from that, that group of people got the impression that they were more powerful or affecting more people than they actually were, versus what we're seeing in the voting, where most people, when it comes down to privately vote for who they want to run stuff, are saying, no, that's ridiculous. At least I can, I don't know, they think they can relate to Trump or something. But they're not, Trump is not some elitist, although he is, but he's not some elitist that is telling them all the stuff they're doing wrong. He's basically just bragging and saying, look how awesome this is. Why don't you be on my team and I'll share some of the awesome, whether or not that's actually true. But that's kind of his messaging. I think that's what's resonating with people. And there's a bit of acceptance in there when the Democratic Party is telling you that you are guilty for the sins of your father just because you're a straight white male. And there's nothing you can do about it except try to repent and repent and repent for the rest of your life.
It won't even work.
Yeah. Well, Trump's the exact opposite of that, obviously. And in a lot of ways, that just resonates with more people. People are thinking like, hey, I'm in the Midwest. I'm not a racist. But looking at what the Democrats are telling me that I need to do, and I need to, take this training and whatever, everybody's guilty, it's just not going to fly.
It's interesting. So recently I read a book. It's How to Have Impossible Conversations. It's by Peter Boghossian, who's a philosophy professor, assistant professor, I think, but a professor at Portland State University, and by James Lindsay. He's the founder of New Discourses podcast, and both of those two were two of the three members of the grievance studies hoax. And James is a PhD in mathematics, and they kind of compiled most of all of the literature about how to properly have conversations with people, and put it all together, and it's really good. One of the things they talk about repeatedly in the book is they go over the different ways in which people have conversations. And I don't remember all, there's like 5 or 7, I forget, but there's ways in which you can approach a conversation with somebody. And when they said, one of the ways is morality, like the things that you believe. And like when I talk to you and you and I talk, or me and anyone, or you and anyone talk about stuff, about what they believe. One of the ways that people believe the stuff that they believe is they believe it morally. Like I may believe a lot of things because I read about facts. Like that's actually important for me personally. Some people don't care about facts; they care about feelings, right? And so that's like a very low level, a low resolution difference between people who believe, let's say, in woke social justice theory and people who don't. There's other things, but that could be a low resolution way of, a lot of people believe feelings are paramount and lived experience is the actual paramount way of knowing.
Right.
And so this, a lot of this critical race theory stuff and critical theory and all that, social justice theory, makes sense to them. Whereas other individuals who would prefer scientific reasoning and knowledge are like, that's fine, but I want more. But it's the moral issue that gets everybody. And so what I see here is I see a fuck who's an asshole and disgusting and says inappropriate rhetoric and happens to be our president, but who doesn't judge other people for the decisions that they make. He may say rude things about people and he may call them names, and he may be, people can have plenty of arguments about his xenophobia or his racism or whatever, but he's unabashedly like does whatever the fuck he wants.
Yep.
So you know where you stand with him. Whereas the other side attacks you morally. And it's like both are reprehensible. Like I don't really have much patience for someone who just runs around and is mean to people for no reason. except to maybe just to be an asshole. Like, it's not clear to me that he's actually a xenophobic, racist, transphobic, sexist individual. It's not clear that it's that, or that he's just trying to just do it for the shock factor. Like, I don't know. Either way, it's still horrible, but at least he doesn't tell the public, he's like, if you don't believe me, you're morally wrong. And I'll give an example of this. What did Joe Biden say to Charlemagne, the God? He's like,
if you don't vote for me,
you're not black. You're not black. And it's like, are you?
Whoops. That's
literally the same thing. Like, there isn't any difference between that and if you don't believe me, you're morally wrong. Mm-hmm. In that context, it's the same thing. It's like black individuals who don't believe in Biden aren't one of the few things that they can like truly identify with, because it's their skin tone, and so you identify with it usually pretty strongly. It's like that's just been taken from them, or to use critical theory, it's been erased. Like, Joe Biden just erased a bunch of the black community by saying that.
No, tried to.
And it's like, I didn't vote for either of them, to be totally honest. I didn't vote for Trump, or I did vote, but I did not vote for Trump or for Biden, because I don't like either sides of that coin. But if those were literally the only two options that we had, I might move out of the country, because it wouldn't be a democracy if we were only given them, should have another choice. But I can understand why someone would not want to vote for a party that plays the moral card versus a party that doesn't. And which is weird, because I don't like Trump at all. Like, I have a hard time separating those two things, but I think it's more wrong to play the moral virtue card than it is to just be a piece of shit.
Well, and the irony is he's managed to align himself with the evangelical right.
Yeah.
Somehow, some way, those the religious leaders are willing to endorse him.
Yeah.
Even with just him being him. But it's Team Jesus, so he's our guy. You got to vote for him. That fascinates me. The I don't know, cognitive dissonance, I suppose, that has to be present in order for that to take place.
Yeah, I think that most likely my presumption is that it's probably part moral and part they care about a couple of very particular things. Mm-hmm. So my assumption is that uber conservative Christians believe that they have the moral high ground, first and foremost. So anything outside of that doesn't matter. It's like, right. Well, we have the moral high ground, so whatever. Don't care about the rest of it. But this is the person who's going to protect the things that we feel the strongest about. Regardless of what he does, he can do his own thing. We're the ones who are morally right. It honestly, and this is just a connection I just made right now, but I wonder if it's something similar to how, like, say, the left, the Democrats in general, or even the Black Lives Matter movement feels about Antifa. They kind of reject Antifa as like this actual group, but they don't ever put them down and say what you're doing is wrong, because they feel like they're morally correct, and these people are good for them in some ways because they do some things that they actually want to get done, which is create chaos and cause destruction and to help foment insurrection and bring about the downfall of patriarchy and some other things that are more radical we can get into. But I wonder if that's the parallel, is that it's, if I have the moral high ground and I truly believe that, I'm willing to hang around with morally reprehensible characters if they're willing to get things done that I want to get done.
Sure.
They're the necessary evil for me to get the things done that I want. And
even if that goes against your own morals. But
yeah.
Somehow you fit that in your head.
But it's them and not me. Like
right.
It's a weird sort of, I don't know if necessarily cognitive dissonance is the right term, but it's my assumption is that it's something like that, where they're just like, well, I'm right, and these are infidels or whatever. These are the barbarians. They're not as conscious as I am. Like, they're not as morally correct. They're sinners, whatever. And I'll do whatever I can to save them. It also kind of reminds me of how a lot of colonizing countries felt when they went to other countries and then met the indigenous peoples.
Yeah. Savages.
But they actually felt that they were, unlearned, and they thought a lot of pretty bad things, but they wanted to educate them with their ways of knowing and say, hey, this is the enlightened way, and it's correct, and we need to civilize you, and because what you're doing is backwards.
We're going to save you from yourself.
Yeah, this all sounds kind of like the same thing to me. I don't really see much fundamental difference between these lines of thought, which is ironic if that's actually what's going on from the left, because the left rails against the notion of colonialism. Yeah. Part of critical theory is post-colonial theory, which is trying to break apart colonial theory, which is to say you're trying to break apart how cultures were founded as a result of colonialism. So that would be ironic as a side tangent, that actually would be, but I'm probably going to have to think more about this and flesh this out a bit more, but on the surface, it seems to me to be a very similar line of logic of, well, we have the right stuff. We're correct. Now get in line or goodbye.
Right.
Whereas, Trump is just I'm going to say whatever the fuck I want. I don't care. I just want people to do what they want to do.
Well, I don't even think it's that. I think it's just stay out of my way.
Yeah, maybe that's a better way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. By every bit of evidence, he's a complete narcissist.
Yes. And that's why I'm not entirely sure that he's actually xenophobic or sexist or racist or anything. That's partly why is that I'm not suggesting that he hasn't said things that are for sure, phobic in some way, but it isn't clear to me that it's not just simply a means to an end for him and he could care less.
I think it's a blend of both. I don't think he is.
I could see that. Yeah.
Intentionally going after a specific, the Chinese or something like that, because he hates Chinese people.
Yeah.
It's because they are the enemy. Just because that's who he's competing with in some, whatever the line of logic he's talking about, whether it's trade or what have you. But there is nothing other than winning for Trump. And if you are not on his team, you are the enemy.
Yeah.
And, anything goes. If you don't cheat, you're not trying. And he'll do anything and everything he can get away with.
Yeah. And he's willing to push
stuff that he can't.
And he's willing to push the boundaries of that
as hard as he possibly can. But I think it's the motivation is strictly just to win. Has nothing to do with benefiting or hurting any other group of people. It's either you're on my team or you're not.
Yeah.
And if you're not, then I'm going to do everything to dominate you.
Right, exactly. So, and
all of which is to say Donald Trump does not care about any of us.
No, right. Yeah.
At all.
I think that's a fair assessment to make. But then again, to go back to kind of where we started at the top of this, I do understand why people would say vote him over Biden as a result, because you have two evils, which we've talked about before. This is utter shit that most people are going to, most states you actually can't, there's a third option you can have, but it's pretty restrictive on, you can't just vote for whoever you want, right? And so you're kind of just stuck with the two main primaries. And you got two really shitty options. Mm-hmm. One of my friends, who will remain nameless, but they said that for them, because they voted Democrat, they voted for Biden, and they said that they had to look past the ideological issues with the party and to think about it like a chess game. I'm moving a piece with the intention that later on down the road I can get to an end game that's better, which was an interesting way to think about it. But they use that phrase, I had to look past the ideological issues. And so I think it's even clear if they're representative of any part of the left in the country, I think people are very well aware that both the left and the right have ideological issues. And in particular, as someone who is kind of always identified as being on the left, I notice it more. There's a clear ideological problem with the left. And some people are having to like suck it up and move past those issues with the hopes that in the future it'll be better. And like, that's where we're at.
Yep.
It's like, check and pray. Or I guess you fill in the circle and pray, it's like how you take a test when you haven't studied. You're just like, I'm just going to guess the answers and hopefully the Scantron comes out and gives me the best score. I'm so angry that that's where, both as a society, but also as the political duopoly I think has had more influence than people would like to admit in getting us there. Like as a society, we do vote these people in, but the breadth of power that they control as groups, as political groups, is so large that I can't imagine that this was an accident.
No, I think it's just a natural byproduct of the decay of a large civilization, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
It's not particularly new. Had a thought and lost it. Anyway.
No worries. Before we move on, Sherry Bustos, that is the name of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee chairman. That was the woman I was talking about. She is the fifth ranking position among all House Democrats after the majority leader, the majority whip, the House Assistant Democratic leader, and the Democratic Caucus chairperson.
Okay.
And so...
What the heck is a whip?
I don't know. I looked it up once a long time ago, and it didn't make sense.
Me too.
It didn't make sense then, and I forgot. But so my assumption is that the Congressional Campaign Committee, the caucus chairman or whatever, is they're the people who are going to organize the campaigns for everyone, right? And so they're angry. The Democrats are angry at large because they didn't win as much as they thought they were going to.
They're out of touch. They need to come to grips with that.
That was kind of the thing, is that it really struck me when I was reading through. I had read an article about it, and it's they just don't seem to have a finger on the pulse, and that actually doesn't shock me. Right. So if we think about the ideological shift of the left since the 90s, right, when a lot of the stuff we've been talking about on our podcast really started to take root in the public and outside of academia. A lot of it, and it goes back to morality, is a morality thing about how we're right. First off, it was all in college. In academia, and it was an echo chamber in academia. All the ideas and stuff were just bounced off of each other, and everyone believed. And if you didn't believe, you kind of got pushed out, and it just kind of echo chambered for 30 years. And then it started to disseminate into the public from the people who were learning it. And there was also a bottom up approach from kids who were learning this sort of stuff in school, from school teachers who had graduated, and they were asking their academics about it. When they got to college, they're like, no, teach us more critical theory. And so you had this kind of coalescence of that. And then once they get out into the public, they don't understand that a lot of people just don't care or see through the bullshit, even if they can't articulate it. Because what they've been told is that they're right. They're morally right. Everyone else is morally wrong. And all of their objections prove that they're morally wrong. Like I just explained white fragility.
Yep.
I literally just explained it. And so what you have is a whole bunch of people, and it's probably not a lot of the actual men and women in power in the Democrats, like a large percentage of the House members or Nancy Pelosi. I highly doubt Nancy Pelosi in particular has any fucking clue what critical race theory is or cares. Hillary Clinton, I don't think, has any idea either. I would be shocked. But I think it's all the bureaucrats, the ones that they hire to flesh out their cabinets and then to flesh out the different departments of all the committees and stuff, the HR departments, all this, they're all trained in this stuff, but they don't realize that they're kind of out of touch with the rest of the world because they spent so many years in echo chambers, and then they went into a job where it was also an echo chamber. Mm-hmm. And so they're running into this problem where they're like, oh yeah, we're totally right. Everyone we talk to is right. What's that? They talked about in The Social Dilemma. There's that the law or the rule or whatever, where like everyone in your sphere you hear, You only hear from like 200 people. It's all the number of people you can keep track of in your mind.
Dunbar's number?
Yeah. And so like you hear from you can only know like 200 people or whatever. And whenever you get feedback, if you get feedback from enough people within that number, you think that it's a correct thing.
Yep.
Because all your friends believe it too. And so everyone else must also believe it. It's part of that problem as well. It's like all these individuals believe this stuff. All of their friends believe it. They spent all their time in college, either just getting their bachelor's or getting a master's or PhD. So from 4 to 12 years in college or whatever. Then they go into the workforce, and if it's not there, they implement it. And then they get people hired who also believe them, or they're working for people who believe it. So it's another echo chamber, and it grows. And everyone that they know, the spouses that they date, either believe it or they don't date them, right? They virtue signal on dating apps so that people know, right? That's a big deal, is like this whole issue of virtue signaling your feminism and all that kind of stuff, so that you can pick the right partners. No liberal millennial wants to date a conservative. I think like 78% of, or something like that, I think it's like 78% of millennials said that they would not date somebody who didn't have their shared political values, which is crazy to me, personally. And so they're like, well, this is all going to work. Like everyone we know thinks that this is correct. So we obviously have a pulse on America, and everyone's pissed off at Trump because everyone they know is pissed off at Trump. And so there's going to be this huge shift. And then it doesn't occur, and they're like, what the fuck? And it's like, maybe you should talk to conservatives, or you should talk to moderates, or you should talk to libertarians, or maybe you should talk to the less radical versions, or the less radical lefties, the ones who are only slightly left, or have always leaned left because since they've been alive, the left presidential candidate has been nicer and less of an asshole than the right one, maybe they just, because that's why they voted or whatever. Because a lot of people, they vote based on how nice somebody is.
Sure. Yeah.
That's actually really common. It's like, well, I like Obama because he speaks well, versus whoever ran against him sounded like an idiot. So I'm gonna vote for Obama. I remember that was actually a thing for some people, not a lot, but it was a thing for some people. They're like, I don't really know, but he sounds way more articulate and he's way nicer and he smiles more. There you go. People vote with their gut.
Oh yeah, big time. I mean, to use modern day politics to find the best person to run shit in any large organization, whether it's a city or a state or an entire country, is similar to having a tennis match to figure out who's going to be the CEO of a financial company. What does a tennis match have to do with finances? Zero.
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with it. And you can have a skill set that allows you to excel in politics and in campaigning and in winning elections and the metaphorical tennis game. Doesn't mean a damn thing about how well you'll be able to govern.
What's it's called Peter's Law, I think. I'm going to butcher the whole thing, but roughly speaking, Peter's Law is that the individual will top out at the lowest level of incompetence. So Michael Scott from The Office is a good example of this. He's actually the first one I thought about when I learned about this law. He was a phenomenal salesman. So what happens? He gets promoted to manager. He's a shitty manager, but he never gets promoted higher. But he doesn't get demoted either.
Right.
And so the Peter's Law, broadly,
Peter principles, how I've heard that.
Yeah. Broadly speaking, how that functions is that individuals will, when something's really easy, they tend to overperform, and so they get bumped to something that's a little bit harder, and then they tend to get bumped and bumped until they get to a level where they're actually not competent, but it's slightly above where they would be very good. Right. So you're slightly out of your element.
Yep.
And that's actually, I think, where most people want to be, especially if they're driven, because then they'll try and work really hard at being good at it. The problem, though, is that you get a lot of people in positions where they're good at one thing and not at another, because just like you said, you get great politicians who are shitty presidents.
Yep.
Because maybe the two things have nothing to do with each other.
Exactly.
And it's
yeah.
Right. And I mean, and that kind of makes sense. From what I understand, all Supreme Court justices are judges.
Yes.
Before they become a judge on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. Mm-hmm. You would think.
Do you have any experience? Okay.
Right. And so it would seem to me that you would want to find individuals who are pretty good at managing large governing bodies. That might seem like some versus just someone who was an attorney for 25 years and happened to win re-elections because he had a good committee. It's like there are a lot of different things that it takes to run a presidency, and being a good politician doesn't necessarily have to be one of those. I don't think. I mean, or maybe it does. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe that's all it takes. There's a podcast out. I don't either, but there's a podcast out. I think it's called Unpresidential. And this girl, she goes through some of the crazy things that old presidents have had go on while they were in office, like the stuff that you probably didn't hear about when they were president because they're absurd. Murders, multiple affairs, that kind of stuff, like debilitating health problems. Like JFK was basically comatose for 4 years.
He was all fucked up.
He was all fucked up. Like he was just on huge amounts of he had a doctor who prescribed him a cocktail of like 7 different drugs that no one ever found out what was in them. And he literally couldn't function without it. Like he was just like on the floor drooling, unfunctional. And that's part, what was it? Is he the one who did the Cuban Missile Crisis? Was that him?
Yep.
That meeting, he was high during that meeting.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
The doctor like injected this shit with him like 20 minutes beforehand. And he like walked in and did this meeting, and whoever he met with, because I don't remember exactly how all that broke down, but whoever he met with noticed it and was like he was like not able to really articulate anything in the meeting. He just made an ass of himself. Managed to get it done, but apparently he just made a complete ass of himself in the whole situation. And luckily we didn't go to a war.
That was a close one too.
And it's like this crazy stuff like this. But all the presidents she went over, there were like 4 in succession, and they were all horrible, horrible people. All of them cheated on their wives multiple times. All of them had multiple mistresses. At least 2 of them probably actually murdered somebody. They all had debilitating health problems. I think one of the prerequisites to being president isn't being good politically. It's you have to be massively unhealthy. Like JFK was thin, but he grew up and was like a sickly child. He was kept out of school for years at a time. Like he had all sorts of problems from birth, and it just plagued him his whole life. The other 3 that she went over before, I hadn't listened to in a while, but the other 3 were like huge and obese and had debilitating problems from drinking way too much and eating shitty foods and smoking too much, and all were diabetic and had heart attacks and like other problems. And this is also like in the early 1900s, so the medicine was pretty bad. But it's like, I think that's the actual prerequisite, is you just need to find super unhealthy people who have no moral scruples, and then you can be the president.
That's a good start.
It's like, that's all we need is just a corrupt fat guy.
I would be very curious.
Who's on his second heart and gives 0 craps about being faithful to his wife.
Yeah. Well, at least Trump was upfront about that, I suppose.
Yeah.
I would be very curious to hear what his cocktail is. Because there's, the rumblings of diet pill prescription back in the day, blah, blah, whatever. So it appears he is not opposed to taking some medication.
Yeah.
And as old and decrepit as he is, that dude's got a lot of energy. So the fact that he can do this kind of campaigning, he's had some assistance. I'd be curious to hear what kind of high-end government stuff he can get his hands on.
Yeah, me too. I'm curious to see also like what kind of cocktails they got Biden on as well.
Oh yeah, for sure.
He doesn't seem to have as much energy, so I mean I don't know. I think Bernie just has energy as another old guy who looks like he's dying. Like I think he just has energy. I think he's kind of just always been a high energy. Some people they just never lose it. They're just spry 70-year-olds.
Yep.
And Pedro Sauer's like that, right? He's 60, 67, 68, and he fucking looks 50, but a lot of that's clean living. He doesn't drink, eats super healthy, and he's, doing exercise every day. I don't think these 3 politicians we're talking about do that, but at least to the extent that, old school jiu-jitsu guys do, but
yeah, not so much.
But yeah, it's it's upsetting. Did you hear about I don't know who the lady was, but she was introducing Kamala Harris and to like give a speech like yesterday, and she's like, I'm really proud to to announce our next president of the United States, Kamala Harris.
Whoops. Well, yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Disclaimer for anyone listening: I have not yet checked to see if this is like a verified video or if it was like someone created it. When I watched it, her voice and her mouth movements weren't synced up. So it's entirely plausible that
somebody just edited out the vice part.
Yeah,
of it.
this device part. I tried to slow it down to check, but it was far enough behind that I couldn't tell, and I didn't care enough to look into it any further. But that'd be funny if it actually is true, and then she just introduced the VP as the president. That's something I saw on Instagram. Someone was like, now they're just being upfront with what they really want. The Democrats, and which wouldn't surprise me actually, but. If that was the case, if they're just like, we're just, now that we think we're going to win, we're not even going to hide what we're actually trying to do. Because there's genuine concern, of course, or belief that Joe Biden won't even make it through the first term. And
well, he'd be the oldest president ever, right?
Yeah.
No,
because he's 77.
Something like that.
I think President Trump's 73, 74.
Old guys, man.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Biden literally is at the exact life expectancy of, I think, the average male in the world, or at least the U.S. I think it's the U.S. But so, he should basically die any day now, statistically.
His warranty is void at this point.
Yeah, and so, that's an interesting theory, though, about how long it's expected he may be in office.
So let me ask you this. What are your main concerns if either guy wins? So if Trump wins, what are your concerns there? And same for Biden.
If Trump wins, I don't have any. I'm not sure if really the concerns that I have are as a result of Trump. I don't really listen to Trump. So
what I'm just saying, if he wins this election,
my concern would be, and like I said, this isn't really a Trump issue, but I'm genuinely concerned that I'm not sure, I should say, what is going to happen with the recent Supreme Court confirmation and what that's going to do for reproductive rights for women. I'm actually genuinely concerned about that. I'm not as concerned about the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, or maybe taking parts of it away and then keeping it. That's called something in law. I forget what it's called, but you can take parts of it out and then keep the whole thing, find the whole thing constitutional. They did that with the, it used to be mandatory. You had to have Affordable Care Act coverage or you'd get fined, right?
Yeah.
That was removed. And so they can do more of that. The Supreme Court can, or lower courts can. I'm more concerned with the possibility that with another conservative judge, it seems possible that, say, the rights to the abortion rights may be removed. I haven't thought about this too much. Part of me prefers states' rights versus federal rights. I like governments to be as small as possible, but there's also a problem with having, say, states control abortion rights because a large number of states are going to eliminate it. And I think that women should have the right to choose and should have the ability to do the things that they feel is necessary for their bodies. And so not allowing them that does seem to me to be a violation of their freedom, and which would directly contradict states' rights to determine if women can do that. Because some women can't drive across state lines to get an abortion, right? Or drive 500 miles to do it, like that sort of thing. It could be tough.
Sure.
And so that would be, it isn't a fear that directly affects me personally, of course, because I can't give birth. But I don't know if that's necessarily something that is predicated on Trump getting reelected. It's just more, that's something that I actually genuinely fear. Outside of that, I haven't. The other big thing that I would fear, but again, I'm not so sure that it's this won't happen if Trump doesn't get elected, is more divisive ethno-nationalism, because he's a divisive guy. So, sorry, not more divisive, more prevalent ethno-nationalism, right? From the right, because he's divisive, he's stirring up a lot of polarity amongst people, and that's going to that'll naturally give an amplified voice to, right extremists.
It already has.
It already has.
We've seen the results of that in the last 4 years. I'll give Biden credit. He went on air live to give a little speech of some sort while we're still waiting for the result of the election. I was a couple minutes late to the studio here. It was a very brief statement, but I did like the tone of it in that he was emphasizing that if he wins, he's going to work just as hard for the Republicans as he does for the Democrats. There will be no more blue states and red states. It's just the United States, et cetera, et cetera. And I that's a nice signal, you know.
Sure.
I like it because even if it's not reflected in policy, we have seen over the last 4 years what happens with the opposite type messaging coming from the White House.
Yeah.
And how that has emboldened actually problematic groups, like, you know, white supremacists and stuff like that.
I think it's the perception trumps or I guess maybe pun intended there. It trumps the actual accomplishments.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you say shit like stand back and stand by, that's just irresponsible.
Yeah. I was talking to my girlfriend and her mom the other day about it. We had dinner together, and we were just kind of chatting about things, about politics stuff, and like I actually couldn't tell you without prompting things outside of, I think Trump had a tax cut a couple of years ago that saved me some money every year on my taxes, but I don't know if I could. And then he removed that requirement for health insurance. I don't know if I could actually tell you the things that Trump has accomplished as a president. But like most people, I could probably at least rattle off what I've heard he's said and done that was inappropriate. And he makes all these claims, and I've heard other people sort of back them up, whether they're Republican or Democratic individuals themselves. They've talked about some of the great things he's done. Like from what I understand, which is very little, there's actually some credence to his claim that he's done more for the black community than any other president, save Abe Lincoln. I don't know the validity of that, but it seems to me to be that there's been a lot of stuff that he's actually done, but you'd never know it by all the shit he says. And so there's the perception of what he says that totally just negates everything he may have, because let's assume that statement is true. You would never know because he says so much stuff that just takes away from the fact that he's actually helping a community that by and large will never vote for him.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's got to be a better way to handle that. I heard a report that if 20% of the black community voted for Trump, let's say, or just Republicans, in any general election, the Senate, the House, whatever, if 20% of black vote went to Republicans, Republicans would never lose another election again, like a general election. All they would need is 20% of the black vote. No, basically, the assumption is that everything else holds constant. They just get whatever number of the white vote they get. They will win every presidential election forever, unless the demographics change drastically.
Wow.
And I think they pull it like 5% every year. And statistically speaking, from like a temperamental standpoint, it should be 50-50 because temperaments, broadly speaking, operate on a bell curve. There's some variance depending on sex and biological or gender, or however you want to break it down, but there's virtually no difference based on race. And temperament tells a lot about how people vote. And even if it didn't tell that much, even if it only accounted for like 30% of how people vote, the odds that the other 70% of how the black community votes would skew 95% of them to the left is, there's something else going on there. Like there's just no statistical reason why all black people should vote for the left and not the right at all. And part of it's messaging. I think the biggest reason is messaging. There's bound to be a significant portion of the black community that votes left that actually is fundamentally conservative. They just don't like the message from the right. I can't see how that wouldn't be a sizable portion because of temperament, just because of temperament alone, but also because, I mean, the constant refrain on the right is that Democrats have done nothing for the black community over the last 60 years, because if they had, then the impoverishment rate of, say, Latinos and the blacks would be lower. There would be less criminality. They'd have more money, all these kinds of things, and they don't seem to have that. But they have all these programs that don't seem to work, and there's probably a little bit of truth to that. And if they still vote Democrat,
I think on both sides, it's mainly just lip service. I think
Yes.
anything that Trump has done to benefit the black community, my guess is, and I don't have the full details on this, my guess is the vast majority of it, if not everything, is strictly incidental, meaning hypothetical example here that might be way off base, but you get the idea. Trump opened up fracking, which created a bunch of jobs, got us to be energy independent. Those, in isolation, those are good things, right?
Sure.
And maybe, just maybe, that created a bunch of jobs that the Black community got to get employed with.
Sure.
Right? So create a bunch of Black jobs. It's not like Trump said, we need to create Black jobs. Let's look into fracking.
Yeah.
It's, Wall Street donor X, Y, or Z is encouraging me to open up some fracking. And then in retrospect, somebody on Trump's team, certainly not him, but somebody on Trump's team will say, hey, look, you've decreased unemployment in the Black community because of the fracking thing.
Sure.
Oh, no shit? Okay, cool. We'll talk about that. But that was never his intention.
I doubt it.
Yeah. So I think that, there are some things that some beneficial things that Trump has done. Particularly as we've talked about, working to combat the critical race theory in education and stuff like that. I do support that. So credit where credit is due. But I think his motivations are entirely self-centered.
Yes, I totally agree.
Yeah, there will be some things that benefit some people along the way, but that's never his intention. So to have him as the guy running shit is not good for anybody unless you're in their pocket.
Yes. So this actually brings me to wrap up your initial question of what I'm afraid of about both Trump and Biden. So for Biden presidency, critical theory or social justice theory is what scares me the most. Or I guess more specifically, totalitarianism, which may be a little bit of a leap for a lot of people, but it's actually a pretty small leap in my estimation. I don't think it takes very long to go from wanting progressive things to pushing progressive ideology to pushing, these kinds of theories that we're talking about, which are postmodern and Marxist in nature, roughly speaking, to a totalitarian regime.
That's just where that ends up.
And that's worse than, and you may ask the question, Trump's an authoritarian broadly, right? Like, so, what's the that's bad too. And it's like, I'd rather have an authoritarian than a totalitarian, because an authoritarian is one person who controls it and does what they want, whereas totalitarian is a state that controls everything. And it's way worse. Yeah. And it's a hydra with multiple heads versus, a kleptocracy run by one individual, it, and there's other things to it, but that's broadly speaking how I look at, like, no one is like, Biden is going to come in and usher in this socialistic utopia based on critical race theory, and everyone's going to be equalized, and all outcomes will be the same, and everyone will be the same height and the same gender fluidity, and we'll have equal jobs and make equal money. Because no one gives a fuck about Joe Biden. What does everyone say? They're like, the Democrats are going to come in. Kamala Harris is going to come in. Everyone below Joe Biden is going to come in and usher in this critical race theory, and no one cares about Joe Biden. He's a filler, right? Whereas all anyone cares about on the right is Trump. Like, and that's the big difference. Is like, it's Trump, 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 Trump. It's not what strings is Mike Pence pulling in the background. That was actually the initial fear, was that Trump was going to be a puppet for this spider-like figure of Mike Pence. I remember that specifically when Trump was elected, is that a lot of people were afraid that Mike Pence was this like evil, this evil vampire that was actually just kind of puppeting around Trump like a Cheney did George Bush. Yeah. Right.
That's almost charming in retrospect.
Yeah. But that's like actually what people are afraid of with Joe Biden. They're not afraid that Joe Biden's going to come in and just do all this crazy lefty stuff. They're afraid that Joe Biden's going to come in and do nothing while everyone behind him implements all this crazy lefty stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, fair enough. Like, that's actually a concern that I have. To the degree that that'll happen, I don't know. But we've talked a lot about this on the podcast. It's not a simple matter of pointing at critical theory and saying that's wrong. It's obvious. Look. Like, look at the Black Lives Matter movement. That's wrong. It's like, good luck with that. It's like, you got to dig deeper. And it's like, look at the equity movement. That's wrong. And I saw on Facebook, there was this argument on Facebook, and normally I don't go through these threads, but this was about equity, and so I was like, I'm gonna suck it up and waste 2 hours of my life, and I took a nap afterwards because my brain hurt. But there was like a 70 comment thread between two people about this. It was interesting, and this girl was talking about equity, and apparently I actually reached out to both of them via private message to ask them some questions, but apparently the guy who responded knew her from high school. And so they were having like a semi-combative exchange, and she was talking about equity, and he was like, can you explain more about this? Because what you're describing is equality of outcome. That's what equity is. It's a problem. The same things like what you and I talk about.
Sure.
And she's like, no, it's not. No, it's not. And she started explaining, and he's like, that's equality of outcome. And then she's like, you don't want people to be equal or whatever, the similar line of like, you're a racist, that kind of thing. She didn't quite say that stuff, but she was alluding to the fact that he doesn't want people to be equal and all this kind of stuff. And he's like, it's not that. It's just the way you're describing is equality of outcome, which is a problem. Here's why. And she like put up this little image to explain equality of outcome versus equality of opportunity. And she's like, see, this is the difference. And it will literally, near as I can tell, it's a fucking image of equality of outcome. It was a picture where there was like a fence, and there was a really tall person who could see over the fence and didn't need a ladder. And then, or he had a small ladder and he could see over the fence. And then there was 2 or 3 other people who were shorter, and they had the same size ladder, but they couldn't see over the fence. And equality of opportunity. Everyone gets the same thing, and then hopefully you do well with it. And then equality of outcome was the tall guy gets no ladder because he can see over the fence. Everyone else gets different sized ladders so that they can all see over the fence. And it's like you get something according to your needs. And he's like, equality of outcome is outcome based. And she's like, see, this is what it is. It's just giving everyone what they need so that there can be an equal thing. It's not about the outcome. And I'm like, the outcome is that they can see over the damn fence. Like, that's the fucking outcome. That's the whole point of the thing. And she showed another one to try and explain it to him again differently. I think it was the same author who drew it, but it had to do with different people trying to ride a bike. And so there was one person on a regular bike and a kid on the same bike, but he was too small to ride the bike. And then someone who was disabled who couldn't get on the bike because they're disabled. And that was an opportunity. And then equity, or that was equality. And then equity was they all had different bikes that were tailor-made to them so that they could all ride them. So the kid had a small bike, the person who was disabled had like a bike where they sit and they could pedal with their hands or something like that. And it's like the outcome is still what's equalized. That's the entire fucking point. And you're also using easy answers. Like, of course I want someone who's disabled to be able to ride a bike.
Yeah.
That isn't the point. And he kept trying to like reiterate this, and I could tell he was like trying to be like kind of nice about it. And I emailed her. I didn't actually ask her like, how is this not equality? Because he actually asked her, he's like, how is that not equality of outcome? And she tried to explain it, and she explained equality of outcome. And I didn't have the heart to ask her, because I IM'd her and was like, hey, like, can you show me where you got this? Like, I'm really curious about this. Like, I was trying to be pleasant and kind of see what it was she knew. And she sent me to this website that had all these videos and stuff explaining what equality of outcome was, or equity was, and it was equality of outcome.
Send me a link to that if you think of it.
I'll try and find it again. Yeah. And my point though was it's like she didn't get it, and I was just like, that literally is that you're like purposely not paying attention to the outcome.
Making my case for me.
Yeah, you're literally making the case because you have no idea that you're actually talking about the outcomes. Like you're trying to equalize everyone at the top, and like that's my legitimate fear is that over time, that's what we'll see happen. And there's going to be goods to that. Some of those things are actually kind of good. Like some outcomes should probably be more equalized than they are. I think that by and large is probably always a true statement. Excuse me. Does that mean that they're going to be? No. And does that mean that as a society we should force those things? Also, no. It isn't clear to me that just because some things are unequal, that that's wrong.
Life is unequal.
That's the thing, is it's like I just don't get the assumption that because there is inequality, whatever that may be, that it's therefore wrong. Sometimes it is. Like, some people are homeless, and there's inequality with people who have homes and people who aren't. Like, and that's, I don't think there should be people who are homeless unless they want to be homeless by choice. And some people actually want to be homeless by choice, to be fair, but that's actually moderately common. At least it is in on the West Coast, because it's, at least in the South in particular, because it's dry. And in Hawaii in particular, it's common because the weather there is so nice, so many days out of the year.
Much easier to be homeless there.
Yeah, no,
than,
right,
say,
exactly.
Seattle.
But in my hometown in particular, there was a study that was done, and there's a decent homeless population, but it's a small city, and so the city itself can keep tabs on all the homeless people, and a large majority of them are homeless by choice. They're disaffected by society. They have money because most of them they've had traumatic accidents, work accidents, or things like that, and they've won settlements. I would say, I think it was like 35%, something like a pretty large majority, not a majority, but a pretty large group. They had issues. They'd won settlements for psychological issues at work, or whatever. I think a few of the women had won divorce settlements and things like that. What it doesn't matter what it is, but they'd have money from the state or something, or from an inheritance or what have you, and they would choose to live off grid. And it's like, some people just want to do that.
I knew there was a few, but that's a high number. That's way more than I would have guessed.
It shocked me. I'll see if I can find the article in the archives of my hometown newspaper, but because the number is probably actually different than that percentage, but it was high. It was high enough to where I was like, oh damn, like it isn't like a single digit number.
Right.
It was high, and I was like, that's a lot of people who just choose to live on the street.
Yeah.
But they don't want to follow the rules of society, and so fine, let them do it. But there are also other things where it's not clear to me that you want to. We were talking a couple weeks ago about how are we going to properly equalize basketball. Like,
You can't.
basketball alone probably accounts for a huge percentage of black millionaires, because it's mostly black in the NBA, and I think in the WNBA. It's like half of those gone.
Well, here's at a broader level. If everything is equal, and the outcomes are all the same, by definition, you get rid of excellence.
Also true.
And without excellence,
Why would we do anything?
pretty much.
Sorry, Elon Musk. You have to
Whether-
stop doing everything that you're doing because it's unequal.
Right.
So I
whether
guess-
it's for your own personal accomplishment, or if it's just something that you enjoy watching and or listening to, whether it's your favorite band or your favorite director making movies, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we enjoy excellence.
Yeah.
And that would crush all of that. It does crush all of that. We've seen that. It's not hypothetical. Yeah. I think for me, as far as concerns, it seems to me that if Trump wins, there's a more immediate concern. And if Biden wins, it's potential to be a longer term. It's kind of like with Trump, you broke your arm and maybe it gets infected. I'm trying to think of something worse than an arm break, but say you broke your arm, it definitely needs to be addressed right away. Whereas Biden means you got cancer.
I was just going to say cancer. Yeah.
It's going to take a while to kill you, but
not skin cancer, like a cancer that actually kills you.
Yeah. Pick your cancer. What's your favorite cancer? But if Trump gets reelected, and if you recall, he set the record for the earliest person to register for reelection.
It's like a weekend or something.
Hours.
Hours, that's right.
It was a matter of hours after the inauguration, he registered for reelection. That was in 2016. So obviously that's been on his mind. He wants to win.
Sure.
So if reelection is no longer an option, what are Trump's new motivations? how much of a bull in a china shop can he be, knowing he doesn't have to worry about reelection if he gets in? So that's the immediate threat. Mm-hmm. That's we might bleed out, right? On the flip side, if Biden gets in, particularly if it becomes the Harris presidency, the potential to give enough oxygen to this, the woke-tivists and the progress they have already made through our institutions and through our educational system will only get worse, maybe greatly emboldened to the point where it could legitimately threaten the republic itself.
Yeah.
So I don't know which would be worse. Can we survive another 4 years of Trump? We'll just get through it, or will he be so deleterious to the office itself and our standing on the world stage and all of everything? Mm-hmm. Or are we opening the door for something that in the end kills the republic? I don't know. Hopefully I'm wrong about both of those.
Well, the other thing too is he could do what Grover Cleveland did, and he could, let's say he doesn't get elected, he can always run in 4 years.
Sure. Well, Trump is not going away.
Yeah, I mean he's old, but Grover Cleveland he lost re-election and got voted out, and then the president after him did so bad that people were like, they basically asked him to come back. The Republicans, at least, I believe, it's the Republicans, and so he's a Democrat, sorry, but he ran again and won because people, I think, from what I understand, basically it was a case of they were a little lukewarm about him at re-election. I don't think he tried too hard either, but then after what came in after him, the public was like, this was worse. We want Grover back.
Right.
And so, he ran again and won, and they were like, okay, we like what you have. It's kind of that case of, I'm missing you after you're gone. Right. And so, sorry, that was a fake breakup, come back. And so he could still do that. Yeah.
How crazy would that be if Trump actually loses and then gets elected again in 4 years? That would be,
yeah.
I didn't want to think about that. That's terrible.
I want to go back to one thought about, we were talking about equity. I want to finish it in my head, get it out of my head before we move on. So the pictures I was talking about like looking over the fence, there was another one of like an apple tree that was bent. And so like a tall person could pick it with a small ladder, and then like a short person couldn't because they had a short ladder and it was bent on one side, so they couldn't reach it. And so the whole purpose was to like straighten the tree out using, wood and construction, and then give the short person a taller ladder, and then they could, pick that. But anyways, they had a bunch of examples like this. Like a tall person could reach the top of like an armoire, and then a short person couldn't. And it made me realize that, like, okay, you're describing equity when you fix this problem. But at the same time, what are you going to do with that same armoire, let's say, or that same fence? Let's say that there's a fence, and the tall person can see over it, and that's what they do really well. The short person can't, so you give them a ladder. But what if the short person could just as easily dig and crawl under the fence? Let's say there's a small hole under the fence.
Sure.
And they could just easily slide under. And that's what they're good at. Are you going to fill the hole up because the tall person can't do that? Or are you going to make the hole bigger? So now you give the short person a really tall ladder, and then you either fill up the hole for the short person can't get through now because the tall person can't get through it, or you make the hole even bigger. Like, and then you just create all these problems. It's like maybe the tall person is really good at doing certain things and really shitty at doing other things. Like there are just some things that Shaq cannot do.
Sure, yeah.
What comes to my mind actually is in the movie Forrest Gump. Tom Hanks, I think they call him a foxhole checker or something. He crawls into holes in Vietnam to check if there's any Viet Cong in there. And it's like a tiny hole, and he's kind of got a small body, and he's fearless, so they shove him in there. Shaq's not getting in those tiny holes because he's 5 times larger than the average Vietnamese individual, like actually, because he's 7 feet tall and 300 pounds.
Yeah.
So he just can't do that. So for an equity's sake, how are we going to solve those problems? Or maybe we can just let him do what he's good at, and then let small people do what they're good at, and vice versa.
I think it's a misunderstanding of what opportunity means.
Exactly.
In the fence example.
It also assumes that everyone wants this, that I think it also assumes that everyone has the same idea of what good opportunities are and what bad ones aren't.
Excellent point.
Right.
Yes.
Like everyone wants the C-suite at the top of a skyscraper, and everyone wants to be an elite athlete and wants the most banging job and the coolest cars and the hottest dates and the jet. And it's like, not everyone wants that.
Yeah, nor should they. I mean, that's what makes life interesting. I was going to say, like, in terms of opportunity with this fence problem, rather than, how tall is your ladder? Well, I tell you what, here's $100, everybody. Figure it out. Tall guy reaches up and grabs an apple. Medium-sized guy heads down to Home Depot, buys a ladder, and gets himself an apple. And the short person goes, oh, wait, they got apples at QFC. Went and bought himself an apple. Went about his day. It's opportunity, and everybody got the apple. They just got it in different ways.
Yeah,
and that is that's virtuous. Everybody gets the opportunity, but they may go about it differently.
Yeah. Or playing on that example, maybe the smallest person, due to their small size, compact nature, is able to climb the tree.
Just climb it.
And then shake all the apples out of the tree for everyone else.
Yeah.
Not even just get one of their own, but they're able to shake the tree without breaking the limbs like the big person probably would if they could climb it. And then everyone gets apples. And then you have a situation where this person who was disadvantaged due to an unequal opportunity, therefore now had an ingenious idea to provide for everyone around them. It's like you rob everyone of those kinds of things. Now, there are opposite parts of that problem because there are legitimate inequalities that need to be solved that are hard to solve. So I don't want to minimize some of those things, but
it's at the opportunity level.
Yeah, it's to blanketly state that if there is not equality quota numbers or what have you, that it's a problem. It's like, good luck. I mean, just good luck. I don't know how we're going to solve that. It seems to me to be such a silly issue to solve. Silly because I think it's impossible. It's like I just don't get how you're going to force young girls who want to be school teachers into becoming doctors and engineers because of equality, or because of equity. Yeah. And how you're going to force young boys who grew up on farms and who want to be ranch hands and own their own farms to go into social work because it's primarily women. Or how you're going to, force young athletic black kids in poor communities who know that the only way they can get out of their poor community is to get a scholarship to play sports, to go study anthropology or to dig up rocks or to become a history teacher, none of which make near as much money if you're good. It's like, it seems to me to be, I forget who says this. It's probably been said by multiple people, but these kinds of problems, when they don't work, the people they hurt the most are the people they're trying to help.
Yep.
Because let's say that equity doctrine gets put into place as a result of Biden winning, and now everything has to be equal, and we have diversity trainings, and everyone who's white's a racist, and we have to go through all this stuff to equalize and to understand our bad history and to apologize to everyone for institutional things and to pay reparations and then to equalize numbers based on genders and races and all those kinds of things. Who's going to not put up with it? People who don't give a fuck, which is probably 10% of the population, roughly speaking. Temperamentally, they're just going to say fuck you, and because they're assholes. That's the asshole part of the population, the ones who just say fuck you to whoever tells them what to do. Don't tell me what to do. And the other people who are going to leave are the people with money. Mm-hmm. But all of the poor areas of the country, the Detroits and the Comptons and the Oaklands and the whatever cities that have no money, they can't just get up and leave. No one from Compton is just going to get in their car and drive up to Canada,
right,
and then hopefully make a living out of it. They're not going to fly to Paris and, check into their suite that they pay for all year on the Champs-Élysées and just hang out and start a new life. That's what all the rich people do. And they're doing, and they're going to do more. Why would they not do more of it if their government cracks down and doesn't let them do what they want to do? they have the money to leave. And so, or they're just going to throw enough money at people to corrupt the system so that they don't have to do what everyone else has to do. And then again, who gets hurt? The people who don't have the money. And then you don't solve the problem. Like they're assuming that if we get this equalization, that somehow like everyone is gonna A, love it, and B, is gonna be happy with it, and C, can leave if they want to because they don't like it. It's like, it's not gonna work that way. Like you're gonna create more poor people because that's what happens with equality of outcome. And then everyone who's poor is not gonna be able to leave and actually have a better life. They're just gonna be stuck here in a shithole.
Yep.
And I never hear anyone talk about that. Like no one ever is like, all of these programs that seem so good, if they don't work, they actually just harm the people they're trying to help, which is a problem. It's like, you don't want that. You want to actually help the people that you're trying to help. That's the whole point of trying to help them.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and I mean, just to reiterate, since we bang on critical race theory a lot, I am 100% in favor for equalizing the opportunity for everybody.
Yes.
But specifically the Black community, because they have had their own specific challenges, to address that specifically, to give everybody as much opportunity as is possible. 100% yes. It's just the tactic. Mm-hmm. This critical race theory is not the solution. It'll only make things worse. So, yeah.
Very few people talk about how demeaning to the Black community the concept of white fragility is. The concept of anti-racism and the like is. Like, I don't understand why it's not brought up more. There's this notion that white people are always racist and that they oppress Black people, which is bad in of itself for white people. Because like I, as a white person, as a white straight male, have to walk around, if I chose to do so, with this knowledge and this shame that the very breath that I take oppresses the minorities and women around me. Like that's a hard thing to deal with if you want to believe that and then internalize it.
Sure. We're the worst, man.
Yeah, we are the fucking worst. But at the same time, the whole theory behind that is demeaning to the Black culture as well, because it takes away any autonomy and any ability for freedom of choice from women and members of the Black community.
Exactly.
It's like, no matter what you do, because I'm white, I oppress you, period. You have no power. Good luck.
It treats the white community as a monolith.
Yes. And it's
which
like,
is racist in and of itself.
Also true. And at the same time, and like I said, no one ever talks about it, but it's like, what a message to tell a quote unquote marginalized community. Mm-hmm. It's like, hey, yeah, we know you're marginalized and life's been bad. The reason we have the enemy, and it's white people, and there's nothing either of you can do about it.
Yeah, once we fix the white people, life's going to be better for you.
Yeah.
But until then,
like
hang in there.
So yeah, so I'll take that back. It's not nothing. There's nothing you can do about it. It's like the only thing that can really be done, which isn't articulated that much, but near as I can tell, the only thing I can think of that would actually solve the problem is to tear down and rebuild whatever structure is creating the problem. Because remember, it's systemic also too. It isn't just individualistic, it's systemic issues. So you tear the system down and rebuild it. And it's like, that seems very powerless to me. It's like you have no control over.
It assumes every Black person is brittle.
That's the thing.
Historically is the exact opposite of the truth.
They're extraordinarily resilient. Mm-hmm. And if you hear the individuals who are talking about a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, they'll actually refer to Black community throughout history as resilient, right? That's one of the big ethos of the Black female community, right? Is how resilient and how powerful they are. Yep. Like the feminist movement has been, has progressed on the backs of Black women from the time of the first feminist movement. That's actually part of, I'm paraphrasing, but that's the saying that they have, is that this whole thing has been pushed forward and born on the backs of Black women. And now it's there. That's partly why Black women are at the forefront of the Black Lives Matter movement. And a lot of the other empowerment movements that we see, the March on Washington, the Women's March on Washington was very Black female centric. And part of that is because they've been ignored for a long time, and all of this has been put on their backs, and they have had no voice.
You know what they need?
They need no power, and they need a system to come in and and tell them
they need opportunity.
that's exactly what they need. But what they're told they need, or what they're claiming they need, is they want to identify an enemy, apparently give up some autonomy and power in the process, and then tear something down and rebuild it. And it's like, I'm not saying that there isn't a problem and that they don't have problems and that shouldn't be solved and that I even understand them, because I don't. But it's not clear to me that the right thing to do is to cede any power that you do have to the white man, let's say, because there's nothing you can do about it unless you tear the white man or the white patriarchy down and rebuild it. It's like that. It's an inherently negative message for everybody, but no one's talking about how inherently negative it is for everybody. It's like, it's no wonder that as a straight white male, I would object to this sort of ideology. Like, the whole thing is predicated on me literally being public enemy number one, right? You know, I'm Johnny Depp in the movie Public Enemy Number One. Like, I'm Dillinger. Like, I'm the bad guy. So
You've
sure,
been watching some old movies lately, huh?
yeah. But it's like, like, of course I would object to it in any way that I would. And of course, according to theory, every objection I make makes me just fragile and racist, but which is just emphatically not true. But no one talks about how it's equally bad for women and minorities, for the BIPOC community. Like, you have agency and power and control. You may not have as much as some other people, but neither do I.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have power over everyone or really anyone.
Well, and how much better it has gotten.
Exactly. Also
Keep
true.
the context of the entire history, from slavery up through Jim Crow. Progress is being made.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't forget that. It could be a whole lot worse. John McWhorter was talking about, most Black people today do not experience that type of racism every minute of every day like they are being led to believe online right now.
Yeah.
You go about your life. And, occasionally you're going to have a very negative experience, and that's not okay. So that's not to demean that in any way, but it is not every minute of every day. Every single white person is calling you the N-word or trying to mess with you in some way. Mm-hmm. This is just not the society we live in. Yeah, there's assholes out there. Yes, there are actual real live white supremacists, but not as many as they would lead you to believe.
Yeah.
See if we've made any movement. Oh, look at this. So it is 3:39 Pacific Standard Time, and it looks like Joe Biden has got 264.
Mm-hmm. He was just projected to get Michigan, I guess.
Okay. So looking more and more like it's going to be Biden. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, hopefully we get rid of the bull in the china shop. Blink, blink, blink. Why is my mic doing that?
I will say this. We have a record number of people who voted.
Yes. So that's encouraging, I guess.
Not even just numbers, like total numbers, because we obviously have way more people than we did 100 years ago, but a way larger number than a percentage of the population voted.
Yep.
I think it's the largest in like 150 years or something.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. So that it's like one of those silver linings. It's like shit's crazy right now, but at least people are getting out.
Right.
Yeah. So I am happy about that. My dad voted for the first time.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. He's 59, 60.
First time ever voting.
62. Sorry, he's 62, 63. First time voting.
Shit.
Yeah. Voted for the first time. He was in prison for a while. So when I was a kid, he didn't, because he had a nonviolent offense, he was able to register with the state and get to vote again. Like you can like apply to the state and they'll give you your right to vote, your right to carry a gun after a certain amount of time. But he just never did. And then he never voted beforehand because he's one of those disaffected individuals who just says, fuck the system. And, drug issues and stuff too, but he just never cared. And he voted. I don't know who. I haven't talked to him since he voted, but it's like people should get out, and even if they don't know a lot, you should still get out and vote. I mean, I'm not idealistic enough to think that every vote matters because they don't. When I told people that are close to me that I was voting third party to a number all of my family told me I was wasting my vote in a state that I've, like I've already mentioned, has voted Democrat its entire life. It's like, I'm not wasting my vote. Like, my vote literally does. First off, that logic is bullshit. My vote has not counted and will never count until I move to one of those swing states where it actually matters. There's like 12 states, and sometimes it's like as low as 5. And in some elections, it's like 2 states that actually matter every year.
Yeah.
Right. And that's it. And it's the Michigan, it's Pennsylvania, it's Ohio, Florida, depending on the year. Yeah, Florida. Yeah. Nebraska and Maine, because they split their votes. Sometimes they matter. The popular vote wins part of the votes, and then there's 2 congressional districts, one left and one right, generally, I think. And whoever wins those gets an electoral vote or something. I don't know. They break it up somehow. But California, Oregon, and Washington doesn't matter.
Yep, those are blue. That's just how that is.
Right, exactly. And some states are like that. You go and live in Louisiana, you're probably always going to be red. Tennessee, red. Georgia, red. Alabama, red. Texas, we'll see. But
that's an interesting one if that one flipped.
Yeah, but
that would be interesting.
It was close, I guess. But mostly because Austin and a few other big cities there's so many people in them.
Yeah.
And then the rest of Texas is huge and unpopulated and conservative. And so I looked at some of the numbers, and some of the cities were like 90% Trump. And then I don't remember the big city, but it was a lot closer. It's 50% Joe Biden, 48% Trump, things like that. I think Austin actually was blue, but
seems like the more you clump large groups of people together, the more likely they are to be Democrat.
well, they're
just like highly populous areas,
highly populous
coastal cities and stuff.
Pluralistic, like there's a lot of diversity.
Yep,
you get a lot of people together.
Yeah.
And there's it's part and parcel of how you have both a functioning society that allows for different peoples, is you need more of them.
Right.
You actually can't have, it's hard to have law and order without a big community. There's no need for it if you have too small of a community.
Yeah, exactly.
But so you're more likely to be conservative because you only need a few things if you're smaller, right? It's like, I don't need change. Everything I have works and it's simple. I know everyone.
Yeah.
But you get more people and you're going to have diversity of ideas. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have diversity of everything else, but you'll have a diversity of ideas, which is important. But
so there's a bright side.
Yeah.
Our sister to the south there, Oregon, has decriminalized.
I was going to bring this up.
Yep, decriminalized like all drugs at a small level or something, or like heroin, cocaine, stuff like that.
I heard heroin, cocaine, and LSD. That's what I heard.
Yeah. And apparently, psilocybin, little shroomies, are legal now for recreational use. So yeah. So
I'm not entirely sure the benefit. I'm not sure what they're trying to get with this.
What do you mean?
I haven't read. All I read was an article that said that it was like on the ballot to be voted for or had been approved. So at some point soon they'll become decriminalized. So there won't be, because the heroin, cocaine, and LSD possession are going to be reduced from felonies to misdemeanors with like $100 fine. Mm-hmm. I didn't hear anything about shrooms, but I'm not sure what the state is hoping to do with that. I don't know why heroin's bad shit. I don't know why they would not make it a felony to have it. And like part of that's ignorance because I haven't read what their plan is. From what I gather, they're going to try and defer a bunch of the taxes they're making from selling marijuana pot, to paying for programs to help individuals who, I guess I would presume, were addicted to heroin. But I would want to see how that's going to work before that seemed. So you have inpatient and outpatient treatment centers for drug abuse. Mm-hmm. Outpatient is you come in during the day and you go home. Inpatient, you come in and stay. Last time, it's been a long time since I checked this, but most inpatient treatment centers where you can't pay, you don't have any money, are like 3 to 7 days. You can't get off heroin in 7 days.
No.
It's not maybe there's a small, like a super small minority, but you don't get off heroin. You're hooked for a long time. Like it takes a while. My dad told me he literally went to prison to get off heroin. It's the actual truth.
Sure. Oh yeah.
He knew that if he didn't, he was going to end up dead. And he's like, the only way I can get off heroin and other drugs is he intentionally got caught. And he was breaking into and stealing pharmaceuticals from doctors, and he realized he was going to die. I mean, he can't get off it on his own. So after he broke into a place, instead of stealing shit and running, he sat down on the front porch, like the front steps of the doctor's office, and just waited for the cops and was like, I did it. Here you go. And
yeah, I know a guy, similar story. His drug of choice was meth, but he got picked up for something, and he had a fairly sizable, he wasn't moving big weight, but he had a fairly sizable amount on him. Long story short, he had the opportunity for, I think, parole. And in talking to the judge, says, Judge, if you let me back on the street right now, I'm just going to go back and use.
Yep.
I want to stay in.
Yep.
And he did. And
Yep.
Last time I talked to him, he'd been clean since. And,
Yep. Similar to my dad, he had committed, I think like 11, 12, maybe 15 burglaries, which for anyone listening is different from breaking and entering. 15 B&Es, which is different from burglary and armed robbery. And broadly speaking, the difference is someone has to be there and you need a weapon. Mm-hmm. So B&E is you can have a weapon, but no one's there.
Right.
And I think there's like a distinction between whether they make themselves known and you threaten them. Like there's some breakdowns, right? So,
sure.
Then I forget the gradients for it, but whatever the case, he copped to all of them. He like helped the police solve like 12 unsolved B&Es. And the judge was going to give him leniency, and he said no. He's like, I need to stay in. Did the same thing. And the judge actually gave him a slightly lighter sentence than he normally would have. Not much, but he gave him a little bit lighter of a sentence because he appreciated the honesty. But it was still like just over 4 years. And as opposed to they offered him like 2 or 1.5, and the high end would have been 5 years total, 60 months instead of he got 51. But it's not clear to me. So anyway, so I'll go back to the DAPC. So you need longer than 7 days for inpatient treatment to help some people, especially with heroin addiction. Some of the other addictions, maybe it's a little bit easier. I'm pretty certain it's actually easier to get off of. Heroin's really, really, really tough. It's outside of alcohol, it's the only withdrawal that'll kill you. You get the shakes from alcohol, it can kill you as well. But heroin and alcohol both, you can die. The rest, it's going to suck. But near as I can tell, it's not fatal. So you need longer. That costs money. So are they going to have 7-day inpatient treatment? Or are they going to do 30-day? Are they going to do 60-day? Are they going to do 90-day? Because if you're not going to do a 30-day or a 60-day inpatient treatment center for heroin addicts, I don't know why you would not criminalize it and put them in somewhere where they're actually going to get clean. Now,
I think I get the logic of what you're saying. I don't think in practice that really lines up. I think that the idea is, and I haven't looked really into this either, but I believe the idea is, just from hearing other arguments along these lines, is to not spend the resources to house people who are addicted to drugs by, making it a felony and having to lock them up for a while. Because the vast majority of people, like your dad and my friend, are absolutely exceptions to the rule. That's not normally how that goes. Yeah. So if someone's hooked on heroin, you lock them up, that costs taxpayers. As far as I understand, most prisons and jails, heroin's pretty easy to come by anyway. So you're not curing anybody unless they want to, or maybe it's a super max or something where it's tougher. Mm-hmm. But drugs are certainly available in prison.
Sure. And
it just becomes that cycle, and the damage done to the rest of your life by having a felony, and not being able to vote, all that kind of stuff. Particularly how that affects minority communities.
Yes.
I think if they get rid of that first level of we're going to try and fuck your whole life just because you got addicted, and put resources into treatment, not to say that this move is going to fix everything. Like, oh, we found the solution. There's not going to be any more heroin addicts. Like, of course not.
Yeah.
But it's a step in the right direction to quit criminalizing people that just have drug problems.
It's my girlfriend and I were talking about this morning, actually, because I read an article about it. But it basically, it seems to me to be a first step in what would be multiple necessary steps to break the cycle.
Yeah.
But like I said, I want to see the details. That's what I want to see. Because if their whole point is just to decriminalize it, and then they're going to fund 7-day inpatient treatment, and that's it. Let's say as an example, I don't think it's going to do any good for anybody. I think people are going to go into inpatient treatment for 7 days and get out and go get high, because they're still not going to be off. They're not going to finish the withdrawals. They're going to be sick. And when you've gone 3-4 days without what you normally take, you will do a lot of things to get what you want.
Sure.
Especially if you're around the people that you're normally around when you get high. You ask them, and if they're also addicts too, in particular, they're going to give it to you. But they may also have it. They may be friends. They may want to help or you may get violent. My dad's told me numerous stories about this kind of stuff, where like it's so easy to just get out and go find someone you know who has it, and they will give it to you. And so, isolating yourself from the people that your friends that you hang out with when you are high is essential. For most people, you need to do stuff like that.
Oh yeah, that's almost always part of the program, right?
Yeah, and so it's like I would want to see kind of what their plan is to do that, because it would seem to me that getting them out of, let's say, getting the black community in particular, because there's a high number of black men in particular that are in prisons comparative to the black population, and so you want to get them out of prison. I'm all for. In particular, if their offenses or things or something I don't think warrant long-term prison time, or like you said, sometimes it's not always clear to me that just because someone has an addiction issue that they should go to prison, right? But there are times when they should, because the actions that they actually, their actions they take when they're addicted are abhorrent and should warrant prison time. But anyways, so you get them out of prison and that's good. But if you don't give them, or at least help them find the tools to set up what you or I or anyone would consider a normal, like a reasonable adult life, they're just going to go right back to it. And then there's not going to be any actual punishment. Like, that's the other problem, is like you have a bunch of people who go out and get high, they get caught, they pay $100, they go into DAPC, they get meals for 7 days, they come back out. That's what I see happening, is just a large number of people who, I see an increase in drug usage by the same people with no repercussions. That's the problem that I see.
Statistically, that for the most part doesn't play out, because like Venezuela, Amsterdam, places that are decriminalized, there may be a slight increase in usage. However, I believe across the board, there's always a reduction in crime. And
that would be my hope.
Yeah. Some other variables. It's simply in that, like, okay, we're not going to try to fix heroin addicts. Okay, fine. You're a heroin addict, you're a heroin addict. But let's not have you skulking around in the shadows, dropping dirty needles in the park and doing all that kind of stuff. Like, okay, you're a heroin addict. Well, here's a place where you can go and get it safely.
Yeah.
So you're not buying it from Dirty Bob down the road.
Are they setting up, do you know if they're going to be set? That would be my other question too.
Somebody will, because it's going to be market opportunity. If it is now legal, somebody is going to be able to make a service to provide that.
That I'm more on board with. Like, I don't necessarily, I'd have to think more about it, but I don't necessarily have a problem with setting up areas where people can safely go get high. I don't necessarily agree with the assumption that it should become common, because I don't agree with rampant drug use.
Well, that's, again, statistically, that doesn't bear out. Even if it's a small increase, it does not become common. And a lot of times when the taboo goes away, usage goes down.
And that's true too. And so that's kind of what I would want to see is over, because I'm definitely aware of that. I mean, you see that throughout history, quite a bit of things, quite a bit of stuff. But, and so I would want to see I mean, maybe Oregon's going to be the test case for a lot of this stuff of like how do they manage it? What are the policies they're putting into play? Because I don't want to see those things happen. And I could see how those things would happen even if studies don't show other places that studies show other places that it doesn't bear out. I could see how it could go off the rails and you could have an increase in crime. Like, it's not hard to imagine that.
How would there be an increase in crime?
More people get high, more crime. Like, I could see that being logical.
I
Like,
think
you're
that
trying
right
to commit
there,
more crime
that
in order to
connection
get high.
Is not
And maybe
one-to-one.
Yeah, and maybe it's not, right, which is fine. That'd be my concern, though.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. When I think you mentioned you had a surgery or something dental and you got some painkillers, some OxyContin or something like that.
God, those things were amazing.
Yeah. Did you feel like going out and doing some nasty crimes? Or did you feel like chilling on the couch, watching TV or whatever, reading a book?
I was too high to do anything.
Right.
But no,
So it's not people getting high that go out and do crimes. It's people that need to get high and they have no way to do it.
That's kind of what I mean, is that if they're getting out of programs and they need to get high because they haven't kicked the problem, then they can't find anyone, and they go commit crimes to get high. And but like I said, I've heard a decent amount of the stuff you're talking about, and so I think it's plausible that you're correct. Until I see it, like, that's what I just want to see the results of it. That's really what I'm trying to say, is that it wouldn't surprise me either way what happens. I just want to see what happens, and if it's for the betterment of the community, great, totally fine with it. I'm skeptical, but I mean, I also, someone who's very dear to me has spent his entire life and all of my life addicted to heroin. And so I've seen what it's done firsthand. And so my skepticism is just born out of my experience of knowing that, like, a very intelligent and caring and compassionate, loving man fucked up his entire life, for his whole life, because of this problem. And it isn't clear to me that legalizing heroin would have solved the issue, honestly.
And for the record, decriminalized, so it's not like you can go out and pick up a pound of black tar and set up shop on the corner or anything.
Decriminalize versus legalize. My bad. Let me rephrase that. Legalize it. Right. It's not clear to me that would have solved the problem for him. And that's kind of where I come at it, is that if this helps solve the problem for people like my dad, or people who were worse or don't have as big of a problem as my dad did and / still does, then great.
I think I would come at it from the perspective of lessening the impact. We don't need to solve this in one fell swoop.
No.
But if your dad was in a scenario where possession was legal and you didn't have to skulk around quite as much, maybe it was a couple less burglaries that he had to commit, because he could just straight up ask somebody, dude, can you float me $50? I need to go get well, or whatever. It lessens the impact.
Yeah. Well, he actually mentioned that he did that because he's relapsed multiple times in his life, and he was clean for, I think, about 15 years, something like that. Maybe a little bit longer than that, but it was a good chunk of time from my early teens till a couple of years ago. And he moved. Well, what happened is he moved back home to his hometown, and he had withdrawals on the way from his lower back pain. And so heroin and other barbiturates have always been his drug of choice because it controls pain.
Opiates, you mean?
Yeah, opiates. Opiates. Because it controls pain. And so he would distill poppy seeds, which are legal to buy, and he would have tea. But as he did more and more of it, he'd get a larger tolerance for it, and he went through withdrawals driving from the East Coast to the West Coast, and it fucked with him. And because he got too dependent on strong poppy seed tea.
Poppy seed tea.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. And so, but he moves back home, goes through withdrawals. Things are fine. Though he gets over it. Takes him 3 weeks to get normal, maybe a month, and has a falling out with his sister, my aunt, and then has to move into a community house, you're homeless, but you can live here as long as you look for a job and don't do stupid shit, kind of a thing. It's actually called the community house, but and drug use is rampant. People get kicked out, but you can get drugs. And within a month, knew half the people there because he grew up in the town.
Yep.
Did drugs in the town. Hadn't seen a bunch of them in 15, hadn't seen a bunch of them in 10 years, 15 years because he didn't hang out with them when he was clean.
Dude, it's been so long. Let's go party.
Yeah, and he's got back pain. And then, what he said he used to do, though, is he would go to the doctors because he almost died a couple times. And he was in his late 50s. And he would go to his doctor and be like, look, if you don't give me a prescription, I'm going to go steal shit and then pawn it for drugs. I don't have a choice. And so he said the doctors would write him scripts so that he could at least somewhat manageably, safely, even though it's illegal for them to do so, do this versus committing crimes. And I don't want to see a situation where that sort of stuff goes on. And that's why I talk about the DAPC part, is that I can see situations where my dad gets thrown into DAPC for a week. It's not enough. And now he's faced with this decision of, I have massive pain and I need something, or I'm going to go steal something to get heroin. So I got to go try and get doctors to give me prescriptions so that I, don't do that, but then I risk there's just so many factors, and the problem compounds. And I could see that being a very real problem for a lot of people. Now, maybe my dad is just unique. He's, for all of his faults, he's an absurdly honest individual. Much like myself, he's very, very honest. And so I think it really only takes an honest person to literally tell a doctor that I need these drugs for my pain, or I'm going to go steal shit and buy heroin.
Yeah.
Most drug addicts aren't going to tell a doctor that. They're going to lie about pain to get drugs because they're addicted to pills, right? He's kind of doing the opposite of what people tend to do because he's really honest. And even with theft, he was very honest about it. And so maybe this isn't the average experience, but those are the kinds of things that I fear will come about more often from stuff like this. And a lot of it's just born on ignorance. I don't know what's in their plan. I'm not sure what Oregon's actually trying to do with this.
I think we've been conditioned growing up in the United States with the war on drugs and everything to associate a slippery slope stance on anything drug related, where it's, we're going to, decriminalize these certain drugs. Oh my God, you trying to make everyone a drug addict?
See, I don't actually think that's going to happen.
Quite the opposite, actually. Yeah. But it's easy to, especially if you're listening to just one side of the story, like the DARE program and stuff like that. Nancy Reagan back in the 80s.
Right.
Be glad you skipped that. That was an interesting time.
No, I don't think at all that you might see initially an increase in new drug users. But I think you see that. I'm sure when pot was legalized in the states that it's legal, you saw an increase in new pot buyers because it's legal now.
Yeah.
People who hadn't smoked since college are like, oh, I can go buy a joint. It's a similar thing. You're going to see some of that, but like you said, I know it's going to tailor off. My concern is just the repeat. A lot of the stuff that my dad did and saw, I can see that if they don't handle it right, just those kinds of low-level crimes repeating.
Yeah.
Because like you said, it's not really what you do when you're high. Though crimes are committed when people are high. I think it's less so with heroin and more so with like crack or and methamphetamine. Yeah. But and so that's a separate thing because you're a little bit more active on those drugs because they're uppers. But it's more the things that people do to get the drugs. Mm-hmm. And even if they're decriminalized, people still have to get them, and that's still illegal. It's not illegal to carry. It's legal, I assume, still to purchase it.
Right.
And so it's like there's not really a fine. There's not really a problem with carrying it. It's just getting it. So it's like I can have as much as I want now, but I still need the money to get it. And I want to see kind of how they plan to handle what could be a big issue. And maybe it wouldn't be. Like I said, I hope it's not. Like I actually hope that it isn't a problem and crime in particular does go down and usage goes down and the number of individuals who are impoverished and addicted to what is it, Schedule 1 drugs, Schedule 2 drugs, those kinds of things, stop becoming addicted to them and get their lives together and, grow up, become functional adults. The men stay with their spouses, their girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever, have kids, adopt kids, raise kids, who then in turn don't become criminals and drug addicts themselves, because the odds are that'll happen. It's like very high with single parents in particular. It's mostly single mothers. And so I don't want to see that cycle perpetuate itself. And that's probably the thing that of all the stuff we've been talking about, that's actually the biggest worry I have, is this will just create a situation where down the road things just get worse. That's my fear. Yeah. I would love it if it isn't the case. It'd be fucking great.
Yeah, understandable.
Yeah.
If I had to bet, I would say that's not going to be the case, but certainly can't guarantee it. And that is a worthy fear. So, how are we doing on time?
We're at 2 hours.
Shazam!
So,
should we call it?
Yeah, we can go. That was a good line to end on, a deviation from the election, which I'm already sick of.
Yeah, let's talk about drugs instead.
I actually do want to. I want to do a more in-depth podcast on drug use. It is very political. Apparently it is. It's more personal for me, mostly because of my father. But I think that people have, like you said, they have this interesting view of slippery slope view of drug use, and my experience doesn't bear that out at all. Addiction to me is, I don't know if it's actually classified as such, but it reminds me a lot of like a personality or mental disorder. Like it's something that is innate within individuals and is stronger in others.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And it's a hard thing to deal with.
Yep.
But it's something we have to deal with. And I don't shy away from it. I'm not scared of it. I actually have addictive parts of I spent my entire life being afraid that I will be addicted to things like my members of my family, because there's a large percentage of my family that has alcohol or drug problems, which is partly why I've never done hard drugs. That, and I'm epileptic, so I might actually die, so that helps. But I don't think I would have done them even if I wasn't epileptic, because I mean, you watch your dad go to prison when you're 8,
that leaves an impression.
Yeah, and some people do drugs too, right? I didn't. I was like, I'm not doing them at all. And but I think there's this misconception about like not only the slippery slope, but also the humanity of individuals who are addicted to drugs.
Yeah.
People are people. They're human. My dad's probably, and I know he has actually done some really fucked up things in his life. Some things that to talk about on air would probably be very bad, because he's a drug addict, and drug addicts do some abhorrent things. They do some shameful things and embarrassing things, and a lot of things that are very illegal. And they should pay for that. But that doesn't make them any less human. I think the more people that talk about that and try and find ways to help, it's good. So like I applaud to some degree Oregon doing what seems to be something that they feel is correct to help with that situation. That's my assumption, is they're doing this to help the addicted community.
Yeah.
But it's not clear to me yet if what they're doing is going to have positive effects or not. But
yeah, I think we're about to lose battery.
We'll
Wrap
see.
this up, buddy.
All right, everyone. Goodbye.
Take care, everyone.
This has been the Beyond Red and Blue podcast. Goodbye, everybody.